Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Edgar, and I'm a member of the RISE Student Advisory Council and a sophomore at UC Berkeley. And as a current college student, I am very excited today to be here to discuss something that is of great interest to me, how the post-secondary landscape is shifting in the wake of the pandemic. And we are very, very fortunate to be joined today with three incredible leaders from three very different institutions. We have Dr. Lori White, the president of DePauw University. We have Dr. Morna Foy, president of Wisconsin Technical College System, and Dr. John Woods, the chief academic officer and provost of the University of Phoenix. And this morning we will delve into how each of their organizations and their very diverse student bodies have adapted and evolved in the face of the pandemic over the past couple of years. And before we start, I'd like to say I'm sure we all agree that students are one of the most important parts of education. So I'm very glad to announce that all of the questions that I'll be asking in this panel were workshopped and written by myself and the rest of the RISE Student Advisory Council. And with that, I'd like to hop in by first discussing the mission of each of your institutions. So if you could talk about your mission and what makes your institutions uniquely positioned to best care for your students.
Thank you so much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. It is so great to see you. And Alex and I have something in common because my undergraduate alma mater is UC Berkeley.
Go Bears.
Go Bears, go Bears. DePauw University is a small liberal arts college located in Greencastle, Indiana, which is a rural part of the state. And Senator Cardoza asked me this morning, well, what are you all known for? And I think we are known for producing incredible leaders from this very small liberal arts college. So Vernon Jordan is one of our graduates. Dan Quayle is one of our graduates. The CEO of General Mills, the CEO of Angie's List, or the founder of Angie's List, and the president of the Boston Celtics. So those are just a few of the graduates that we've produced at DePauw University.
Good morning, everybody. I am also very happy to be here, and as Alex can attest, I'm really happy that the questions were being thrown or developed by students because they are driving most of our work these days as they should be. I am the head of not a single institution, but actually 16 independent two-year public colleges in Wisconsin. We are the public two-year sector in our state. We cover literally every square inch of the place, and it's an exciting time for us. We like to say we were actually built for this moment because all of the changes, all of the creativity that has to be brought to bear during this time of pandemic response is actually how we operate every day. We have, I would say, the most diverse, most complex student population. And we also have another customer, if you will. So while our main mission is to provide economic opportunity through education, so I was really glad to hear the comments of the first two speakers, we also are responsible for providing Wisconsin's employers the talent that they need to be successful. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but those relationships with our students and with our employers are really driving a lot of the work that we do in the system.
Great. Good morning, and thanks, Alex, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone today. The University of Phoenix is, I think, perhaps the first institution that was built only for working adults, almost 50 years ago now, and there's really a professor out of California that decided that working adults weren't being very well served by traditional institutions at the time and built a university just for that, as opposed to a mission serving multiple audiences. And as you well know, the University of Phoenix was one of the pioneers of online education, which we started to do a lot more with the pandemic across all of higher education. The profile of our institution is that we are a majority of our students are minorities. 90% of our students are working full-time. We are 65% female, And we have partnerships with the industries. As I said, we sort of pioneered online, and in terms of really contributing during the pandemic, we ran a 3-day web conference for K-12 administrators right at the beginning of COVID to help them prepare for the fall. I think K-12 sort of scrambled through those first few months, and we ran a 3-day web conference gratis for K-12 teachers and administrators to help them get ready for the fall and retool. So it was less of a scramble and more of a blueprint to be successful. So we're excited to be here. And I think probably one of the more exciting things going on with us that I'll talk about today that I think really makes sense given the first panel is the connectivity between workforce preparedness and skills for job success, and the work that we've done with the redesign of our curriculum for skills.
Well, thank you all for sharing. And Dr. Woods, you just mentioned a moment ago about how there was this scramble in education to handle the COVID-19 pandemic. As I'm sure we all know, education isn't always the fastest moving field to be in. And the pandemic kind of sparked a lot of change. So I was wondering, how did your institutions adapt during the pandemic to best support your students? And for this question, we'll start off with Dr. White as a pandemic president who started her tenure during the height of COVID-19. We'd love to hear your perspective.
I often wonder, I was offered the job or was announced as the president of DePaul a week before the world changed as we know it. And I think to myself, had they waited a week, would I have still said yes? So obviously the pandemic was challenging for all of us who work in any sector of education. And it was particularly challenging for an institution like mine, which is a fully residential student experience. And we are also not known for changing quite quickly. And so to have to send our students home and then figure out how we were going to continue to deliver the educational experience in a way that we had never experienced before was certainly quite challenging. And I was talking with John last night saying, thank goodness for the University of Phoenix, because you demonstrated to the entire sector that it absolutely is possible for us to deliver an educational experience virtually, which clearly we had to do. And so we also had to think about how do we successfully get students home? What about students who can't go home? We have a very high international population, and so we needed to keep our residence halls open for our international students and other students for whom home was not a great place. We had to make sure that students had the appropriate equipment, so when they were at home, they could learn online. And we also had to be much more flexible about our grading policy and allow students to take many more classes pass, no pass, because students told us that the mental health outcomes of having to leave everything that they had been excited about and go home to environments that not all of were conducive to their learning. We had to be a lot more flexible. So there are some things I thought we did quite well in a short period of time, and some things I think we still need to work on, which we will talk about a little bit later in terms of how we use the pandemic as an opportunity to sustain change and not go back to the things that always were, because we've always done them that way.
Dr. Foy, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of institutions were in the same boat, and I took away from that just an incredible amount of respect and appreciation that I get to work with some amazing faculty and college leaders and our students. Most technical college students work. A lot of them are parents themselves. They are juggling lots of different responsibilities. And when the pandemic hit, it wasn't just school that was affected. It was their entire lives. Many of them went to work and were told to go home, and we don't know when you'll come back. And so we had to re-energize, I would say, our approach to what it means to help students be successful. We had to, most of the federal relief money that our institutions got went to students, not to, they didn't keep it at the institution. And we were, making many of the changes in terms of broadband access. I don't know about your states, but Wisconsin is not great, especially in the vast majority of the state that's rural. So we weren't just hanging hotspots outside our campus buildings. We were going down to the local Quick Trip or any place that had a parking lot in different communities so that our students could access their classes. We were thinking of new and creative ways to provide childcare services or to make that option available. That was the number one reason, by the way, that our students said that they had to reduce the number of classes that we were taking or couldn't continue their studies because they had no place to put their preschool children or they were homeschooling their school-age children themselves and, working, parenting, schooling. I don't have the bandwidth to do it myself as well. So there were a lot of very, very specific actions that people had to take. But I think the biggest thing for the pandemic for me was that this acknowledgement that allowing folks to just drop out of college was a very, very bad thing, not just for them, but for our state's economy, for all of our employers. So there was this new sense of urgency and the fact that these folks are actually essential. And it really made me think when this morning's speakers were talking about that connectivity between education and President Reagan's sort of charge to all of us. The pandemic cemented that in Wisconsin, that the pathway for our entire community's economic future starts and ends with our educational system. So that was really a great outcome.
For us, a few things. It is the case and was then that most of our students are online and their studies are largely asynchronous. But we had thousands of students across the country who went to our campuses. They chose that. They wanted a live in-person experience. And I can still remember being in a meeting on a Tuesday and then the following day on the Wednesday where we literally had to decide to move those students who were attending campus instruction online. And while you would think, because we're largely online, that would be easy, they wanted a synchronous experience. It's what they signed up for. And so in that ensuing 3 or 4 days, we pivoted. And lucky enough, we had in the previous year implemented a learning management system that had a synchronous tool embedded in it. And so we trained faculty who would be teaching that following Monday, Tuesday on the use of that tool. And we moved about 5,000 students from going to campus to attending just as they would, 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, for example, but using the synchronous tool. It's a lot like Zoom, but it's built into the platform. So that was a pivot of just a few days to get faculty prepared and students ready, which was pretty significant. The other big thing that we saw, and this was mentioned, was a flexibility with students. Obviously, we've heard a lot about working mothers who were now also tutors to their kids who were in front of the computer all day, and they were our students. And I think we have a world-class team that does accommodations for folks during either pregnancy or illness or with different learning disabilities. Well, COVID became an accommodations need and still is today. Literally, as we sit here today, we provided accommodations to people impacted by COVID, well over 12,000 students since the pandemic has started. And they needed either a little bit of extra time or they needed to take a break and come back. And that, for an adult who works, it sometimes is the kiss of death. They take a break and it falls out of their schedule and they don't come back. I was really proud that our retention numbers held. And so, in fact, we actually improved retention during COVID, which was somewhat unheard of in higher ed. And that continues today. And then lastly, it made us really double down on a couple of things. We were working on a virtual commencement ceremony because, again, with 30 to 40-year-olds, Saturdays, which is a typical commencement day, are sometimes filled with kids' baseball games and other activities. And about 55% of our students come to a commencement. And so we're working on a virtual commencement because that is their reality. And then when COVID hit, we sort of sped that project up. And we've delivered about 8 of these now, and seen over time a lot of folks sort of model their virtual commencements a little bit after ours, which was a point of pride for our team as well. So to your point, amazing folks who are really, really dedicated and became super committed to finding new and innovative ways to address the situation going on, and to be part of that. It was sort of and continues to be a moment in time where you're just really excited and proud to work with like-minded people who are that passionate and dedicated to making things work. Yeah.
Well, I think all of your responses really connect to the title of our panel, Postsecondary Access and Adaptation, and how in this changing COVID world, all of your institutions, although you serve very different students and have different methods before the pandemic, really shifted to provide the best experience possible. And all of you touched on how it changed your campus culture, whether it's a traditional university like DePauw or University of Phoenix with your satellite campuses. I was wondering what remnants of this COVID-19 education the past couple years do you all think are here to stay in higher education? I'll start off with Dr. Foy.
Well, the students, I think, should be proud, because what I want to say is that you drive the ship here. Student choice, student need. What is it that is required? Well, I'll just step back. We used to have a phrase in Wisconsin that we're talking about how we want every high school graduate to be college and career ready when they graduate, right? So they have to make themselves ready for us. Well, we flip that now. Now our institutions need to be student ready. We have an educated student group coming through here now that they know what they want. And when you work with older adults and adult students, that you've always had that. So we had an advantage, I'll give you that, over a lot of our four-year partners. But we are seeing a growing number of recent high school graduates coming to our institutions right away. And so the combination now is that those students also, they know what they want, and they know how they learn best. And it isn't an either-or choice, like I only want to go virtually, or I only want to be in classes of X size. It's I want to choose this semester or this week what I want to do. Maybe I have a conflict during that class time, so why can't I hop on my computer and save the drive time to campus? My babysitter didn't show up tonight. Or I just, I got other things I need to do, so I want to go virtual. But I actually don't like virtual learning that much, so I really want to sign up for an in-person class. Some things we used to say, well, we can't teach welding virtually. You can't learn how to build a diesel truck engine, over the internet. Well, you know what? During the pandemic, we did just that. We used virtual reality to do all sorts of imaginary things. My student that's with me here today was just telling me about one of their professors that put the equipment on a little desk trolley and was driving it around his lab so that his students could watch him do it during the pandemic. So we have created an expectation among students that I think is awesome, because they really believe we can do anything. We are superheroes in education, and unfortunately, we're going to have to live up to that now. So that's the biggest change for me.
And Dr. Woods?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that's here to stay at the University of Phoenix, about a year into the pandemic, we launched a pretty large survey, and it's called the Career Optimism Index. And the idea behind it was to get a better understanding of how workers were feeling about their career prospects. We learned a ton of things, and I think it's become a mainstay for us. We've done our second of these surveys, and we'll keep doing it now. We learned, for example, that 1 in 3 workers were ready to leave their job without even having another job lined up. And so The insights behind that are pretty astounding in terms of a workforce that is really, I would say, demanding. They're looking for the right fit. They're looking for an employer who will support their growth, professional development, their upskilling. And if they don't feel they have that, off they go. And we saw differences in terms of regional takes on that data, on generational takes on that data. And what it really did for us, as we've got in now the second version of this survey, and we've surveyed employers to understand differences between the employer perspective and the worker perspective, and there are big gaps that really provide sort of rationale for what that is called the Great Resignation, but also a recipe for employer being able to attract and retain talent. So that's really helped. It, for us, brought home this notion of time and value being more imperative than ever for our students. And so someone wants a course that helps them to upskill. They don't want a whole degree. Someone might want a certificate. They don't want a whole degree. Or they've got credits from multiple institutions. They want to use that to shorten the time to finish a degree. So we launched with community college partners a 3+1 program where for about $10,000 a student can top up their associate degree in a discipline, not in a bachelor's of general studies, but in the disciplines using their credits attained at the community college. And we launched competency-based programs that were more flexible, more affordable, and have done really well with those because, again, we've sort of figured out that we need to solve for this notion that students want time and value in the shortest increment possible. It used to be the case that the working adult would go back to finish their degree, whether it was a bachelor's or a master's, and the notion would be that once they finish, they might get a better job, or that was certainly the hope. And with the work that we're doing now to kind of break that down into smaller chunks, and those chunks are skills that can be communicated to employers, that people will have a new notion, which is they might get a better job multiple times while they pursue their degree because of the skills they're accumulating. And again, it's that notion of time and value has changed. They want shorter and shorter increments to be able to do that multiple times.
Dr. White?
Morning, John. I really appreciate both of you talking about what we've learned from students, about the ways in which we need to change the educational experience for them in our respective sectors. And one of the upsides of the pandemic for my particular sector, this small, expensive residential college experience, is students told us they absolutely want to be back together in community. So I think prior to the pandemic, there was all this talk out there about let's go to the all virtual degrees for just about everyone. And I'm all in support for those populations of students for whom that is their absolute best option. But if you think about a residential college, it is the one place now in America where we're able to bring people together from largely segregated neighborhoods to figure out how to learn, work, and live together. And if we have any hope for our democracy, we've got to figure out a way to bring diverse communities together, to figure out the messiness of what it means to live, work together in a diverse community. And so our students told us we want to be back on campus. We don't want a 100% virtual experience. So that's one of the things that we learned from our students as a result of the pandemic. The second is our young people are not okay. In fact, none of us are really okay with respect to mental health. And we already knew that mental health was an issue prior to the pandemic, and our students have told us over and over and over, we need much more mental health support. And so we received a grant recently from the Lilly Foundation in the state of Indiana to set up a collaborative arrangement with 2 other college campuses to enhance our ability to deliver mental health services in ways that our individual campuses weren't able to do alone because we didn't have the resources that we needed. And not only are our students not okay, our staff and faculty are not okay either. And so one of the things that we've learned as a result of the pandemic is we also have to pay attention to the people who are delivering the educational experience for our students. And so to be much more flexible about work to allow our employees to work from home more frequently in ways that we probably would not have done previously, to also think how we're investing in their professional development so that they can deliver what is now a different educational experience to our students, and how they can be also much more sensitive and aware to all of the challenges that our students are experiencing. So that's all of what I know we learned through the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. White, because I think talking about student mental health, it really brings up how it's been a very different journey over the past couple years for students pursuing post-secondary education, with some students starting college their first year fully online, and others graduating high school and their junior and senior years, which is supposed to be the time where you're deciding, you're figuring out where you're going, and not having that in-person contact, that access to their fellow students, the campus culture. And I'd really like to discuss how obviously your institutions are all different in background and the students you serve, but how have your college campuses and how are you planning in the future to really promote a connected student body and rebuild that campus culture that might have been lost when students went virtual? So I'll start off with Dr. Woods.
Yeah, I think we have virtual student organizations, and we've actually seen those grow during the pandemic because people are looking for ways to connect. We also have an average class size that is pretty small, and a faculty that is 100% practitioner faculty model. And students are ever more interested in understanding from the faculty member who may have the job that they aspire to have themselves in the future, what that is like and what it's like during the pandemic. And those conversations have really, I think, become heightened. For us, I think the notion of talent, it comes through in the Career Optimism Index survey results as well. I think 92% of the employers surveyed, I think, said that they provide ample opportunities for upskilling and they support professional development, and something like 62% of workers felt that way. So that gap is being addressed in part by the faculty model we have, where, as I said, the faculty are working in those industries and sharing with students what it's like to do those jobs. And people are apt these days to leave an employer, and because they're looking for connectivity, as the conference theme sort of goes here. It's affiliation, it's engagement, and these things come about best when an employee feels valued. And one of the best ways they feel valued is where their professional development, their mental health, their career aspirations are all acknowledged and attended to. Otherwise, they'll go look somewhere else, which is what we're seeing. So we're seeing that in our student base in terms of a real cultural trait. And it's sort of feeding what we do and how our faculty interact with them.
Thank you. Dr. Foy?
I think we are relying on the fact that it's been a shared experience by our entire campus community. So it's not something where we need to fix things for our students, or we need to, I'm really glad you brought up faculty's role in all this, worry more about our employees, and hopefully if we do right by them, they'll do right by students. We are approaching this as, we've all been through a really tough time, and we clearly have to make changes, and try not to assume what those changes need to be. So, for example, the whole idea of, the balance between virtual and in person. Let's not assume that students would just prefer not to come to campus and wear pajamas to school every day, because a lot of our students hate it. And let's not assume that our faculty are unwilling to learn some new tricks and adopt some new technologies so that they can make it happen. Because some of our faculty really want to do that. We have to ask them, actually. And then we have to let them be involved in the changes that we're making on our campuses. And I'm talking right down to physical space changes, where we're putting our resources, the whole issue of mental health. We have some institutions that are very big and well-resourced, and we have some that aren't. But yet they all have a shared need to address this. And so we're approaching it from a lot of different places. We've got a group of smaller colleges have formed a consortium to actually, purchase health and telehealth, mental health services for all their campuses. So this sort of collaborative, connected network approach to a solution. We have other campuses that have actually, for the first time, employ full-time mental health professionals, which, for those of you who are in smaller higher ed institutions, that was a luxury that I never dreamed would rise to priority level, and it has. And that's because the faculty and the staff and the students have made it a priority together. And that's the last thing I think I'll say is that the elevation of our student success, or student supports, or whatever you want to call them, but the non-academic side of the house, talk about silos. In higher ed, that has been historic. The faculty were here, everybody else kind of worked around them. That has changed. We are now looking at students and our staff teams, professional teams, as a whole person. And as a result, they require an equal amount of attention and commitment and conversation around all the other things that are necessary for you to be successful in college, besides a great in-class experience.
Dr. Wright?
I think we all thought that once the pandemic was over, that everything would just get back to normal, and there wasn't anything more that we had to do. And as it turns out, we actually don't know what normal is anymore. Alex, you mentioned that, when I think about the students who arrive on my campus, they've missed, 2 years of the rituals of high school, or, a year at least of the rituals of college. And so we now have to reteach students what those rituals and traditions are, because they don't know. I had a student body president who was a sophomore. And a wonderful young man. He came to meet with me and he talked about his agenda, and then he turned to me and he says, "Now, is that okay?" And I thought to myself, well, the student body president isn't supposed to ask the president whether she's okay with your agenda. You're supposed to come in and say, "This is my agenda. This is what we're going to do." Right, exactly. I had another student write to me and say, "Dr. White, I understand that traditionally students jump in your pool." I live in the president's house and there's a pool. Jump in your pool the night before graduation. Is it okay if we do that? And I thought to myself, I'm really glad you asked, because no, you can't. And I said, the tradition would have been you would have just done it, right? And you would have dealt with the aftermath afterwards, right? And so we are realizing that our students don't know anymore how it is that you lead student organizations, what are the skills that you need, what are our historic traditions that are passed on from class to class. And so I didn't realize that we were going to have to recreate all of those for our students. Now, some traditions I'm glad, I hope they forget about anymore, like those naked runs and that kind of thing. But there are lots of other traditions that, I would be sad for us to lose. And so now I know we've just got to be much more intentional about the ways in which we work with students and talk about the things that have always made DePaw for generations of students and alumni. And then I wanted to get also back to some of the things that we're doing that we would not have ever done before in terms of delivering services virtually, where we would have expected students to come into a physical office. And students are telling us that there are some services that they actually prefer to be delivered virtually, either out of convenience or because, if I've got a mental health issue, maybe I don't want everybody to see me walk into the counseling center, but I'm really happy to talk to somebody virtually online where I can set up my appointment virtually and then have that conversation. So those are things that I don't think we would have ever thought to deliver virtually before, that we certainly will keep as a result of the feedback that we receive from students.
As a student who just finished his first year at college, I'd say thank you to all of you for trying to make the students' experience as good as possible as we're exiting the pandemic. But I'd like to connect back to the theme of our conference, as you heard earlier today, Networked: The Quest for Connectivity. And an imperative goal of post-secondary institutions is to connect students to future careers. So, Dr. Foy, in what ways have you connected students to high-demand jobs and employers in your region?
So placement rate for technical college students in Wisconsin is over 90%, and that does not change regardless of whether the economy is terrible or going gangbusters. And so we feel very proud of that, and we feel essentially a guarantee you employment if you attend one of our programs. And we believe that we have a secret sauce for making that happen. So I love to talk about this topic. And it is actually really appropriate for this conference because the secret is connectivity. It's networking. We don't just ask employers, what are you looking for or how can we help you? We actually build relationships with them over time that are very connected. They're required to serve on our governing boards of all of our colleges. Every single program we offer, short-term associate degree, has an advisory committee made up of local employers who meet regularly and literally change the content of our curriculum and the way we deliver it on an annual basis. So that's a lot of change that higher education isn't known for, but it is the way that we are certain that what our students are learning today in the classroom, they will be able to go and apply into the world of work immediately. There's no, once I get that job, then I'll get another training experience in-house. We also connect those employers then with our students through a variety of things. We have the typical, internships and clinical requirements that all higher ed programs have to have. But by getting our employers engaged in the actual operations of our institutions, they feel a sense of ownership. They feel a sense like they are a part of the college team, and the impact of that goes far beyond them just essentially maybe hiring 60 or 70% of their employees from that college. It extends to helping us plan for the future. I just came from a groundbreaking in a small rural area of central Wisconsin, doesn't have a lot of resources, and they're putting up a $15 million new engineering and apprenticeship center that was, yes, they did get a few grants from the state and the feds, but they had over 140 employers in the region make donations, and that's how they did it. They got the land donated. They're pulling instructors from local employers, so it's a group effort. It's a connected effort, and it's the kind of collaborations that I think are really fundamental if we're going to move forward, especially in times of tight resources.
Great. I mentioned earlier this idea of skills and skills mapping. I'll just take a couple minutes to sort of describe that at a high level. Every job in this country has a Bureau of Labor Statistics job code attached to it, and each of those jobs has the skills that are required in that role. It's then the responsibility of institutions like ours to try and teach those skills in our programs at the course level, at the assignment level, and to assess those. We took all that information and we sort of triangulated it with the advice that we got from our industry advisory councils, from our faculty who are themselves practitioners, and came up with what I'll sort of liken to a bit of a Rosetta Stone of the skills that need to be in each program and course. And it had us look at all the assessments in those courses and determine if we were in fact measuring for those skills. Determine if we were teaching at the assignment level those skills so that they could do well on the assessments. And having done all that mapping, every single course for us now, and this is almost 3 years' work, every single course has 3 top skills that are important, and they all build. And a student gets recognition as they work their way through those skills. Groups of skills can be badges. We've heard about badging, and badging is a way for employers to understand exactly what somebody's learned and for there to be metadata behind that if they want to validate that learning. And so that mapping that we've done has enabled our students, as I said before, to make known to employers or prospective employers the skills that they've acquired along the way. And
Dr. White, sorry,
yeah,
I hate
yeah.
to interrupt. Just to give
Yeah.
Dr. White a brief second to answer her final question too. So thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Woods. So Dr. White, as an academic leader on the Task Force on Campus Free Expression, initiative of the Bipartisan Policy Center, how do you work to create a community that fosters both free expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Thanks for asking me that question. So we segued from skills. I wonder if there's a job code for college president. I've got to figure out what that is and whether I've developed the requisite skills to be able to successfully do that. So thank you so much for that question. The question is in response to an earlier point that I made about college as being a place, particularly a residential institution like mine, where we can bring young people together from various backgrounds to figure out what it means to live, work, and study in a diverse community. I had an opportunity to participate on a task force that talked about how to create environments on college campuses that both value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and are places where freedom of expression and free ideas can flow. And both of those things are really important values, and they shouldn't operate at cross purposes with one another. And so, some of the things that I think that we can do is name those as two important values, is provide students with some tools to actually engage in difficult dialogues. In fact, we have a series of first-year seminars this year that are new on my campus that will enable students to start to kind of test these skills, and then talk about how this is such an important value at our institution. So I know we're wrapping up. There's much more I could say about all of that. We've got a great report online that I hope folks will be able to access through the Bipartisan Policy Center that talks a lot more about freedom of expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thanks for letting me put that plug in.
Well, on behalf of the entire RISE team, I'd like to say a massive thank you to the three of you. You provided, I know, all of us an educational opportunity ourselves, so we can give them a big round of applause.